Welcome to Good Friday of Holy Week with Outside the Circle. Yesterday we kind of left it on a somber note, and not gonna lie, it's not gonna get any better today. Obviously, a lot takes place over this period of time, and so we do have a lot to cover, but I do want to start off by giving a disclaimer that today is not really going to be for the faint of heart. It's going to be really brutal and graphic at some points. We get into the crucifixion, and I really want to get to what that actually looked like, even kind of get into the medical side of things. Mainly because I just don't want to shy away from the brutality. Like, this is young adults. We're older and mature, and as someone who was born and raised in church, I feel like sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the crucifixion of Christ, and we don't always go there to discuss what really took place, and I think sometimes that makes us a little complacent. I know I've been guilty of it for years. Again, born and raised in church, I know exactly what that feels like, in the sense of, we say, oh yeah, Christ died on a cross, as if it's an everyday event. Even with Easter, like, oh yeah, he rose again. It's like, why do we say these like they're just commonplace things? And again, I'm super guilty of this as being someone born and raised in church. And so I just really wanted to, as like I was getting this lesson together, I just really want to not shy away, not sugarcoat it. I really want us to understand what took place that day, because I don't want us getting, I personally don't want to be complacent when I mention stuff like this. And so yeah, but because of that, it is a little graphic, not necessarily for the faint of heart. Just kind of giving that disclaimer out there. So proceed at your own caution. You've been warned. I gave you a shot. Hopefully you stick around, but if you don't, I understand. So, but let's get into it. We do have a lot to read, and I really want to spend most of the day discussing the crucifixion more so than the lead up to it. So we're going to kind of try to truck through some of that up front, because after the events of yesterday, we see a couple of trials that Jesus goes through. So we'll touch on some points there, but I really just kind of want to, again, keep pushing forward to what takes place. So today's readings come from Matthew 27, verses 1 to 62, Mark 15, 1 to 47, Luke 22, 63 to chapter 23, 56, and then John chapter 18, 28 to chapter 19, verse 37. So let's get into this. First they led him to Annas, since he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Caiaphas was one who had advised the Jews that it would be better for one man to die for the people. The high priest questioned Jesus about the disciples and about his teachings. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus answered him. I have always taught in the synagogue and in the temple where all the Jews gathered, and I haven't spoken anything in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who heard what I told them. Look, they know what I said. When he said these things, one of the officials standing by slapped Jesus, saying, Is this the way you answer that you're the high priest? If I have spoken wrongly, Jesus answered him, give evidence about the wrong, but if rightly, why do you hit me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. They seized him, led him away, and brought him to the high priest's house, where the scribes and the elders had convened. Simon Peter was following Jesus at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard, as with another disciple. That disciple was an acquaintance of the high priest, so he went to Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter remained standing outside the door. Now the servants and the officials had made a charcoal fire because it was cold. They were standing there warming themselves in the middle of the courtyard, but Peter was standing with them to see the outcome. The chief priest and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, and they could not find any, for many were giving false testimonies against him, and the testimony did not agree. Finally, two who had come forward stated, We heard him say, I will destroy the temple made by human hands, and in 3 days I will build it up made by hands. Yet their testimony did not agree even with this. The high priest stood up and said to him, Don't you have an answer for what these men are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent and did not answer. Again the high priest said to him, "I charge you an oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "You have said it," Jesus said. "I am. But I tell you, in the future you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do you still need witnesses? See now that you have heard the blasphemy. What is your decision?" They answered, "He deserves death." They all condemned him as deserving death. Some spat in his face and beat him. The men who were holding Jesus started mocking him. Temple servants slapped him. After blindfolding him, they kept asking, "Prophesy, who is it that hit you?" and saying many other blasphemous things. So the other disciple the one known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the girl who was the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. When she saw Peter, she looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him too. You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied in front of everyone, "Woman, I don't know him, but I don't know or understand what you're talking about." Then he went out to the entryway, and the rooster crowed. When the maidservant saw him again, she began to tell those standing nearby, "This man is the one with Jesus of Nazareth." Again he denied it with an oath, "I don't know the man." About an hour later, those standing there approached Peter, and another kept insisting, "This man was certainly with him, since he's also a Galilean. You really are one of them, since even your accent gives you away." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Didn't I see you with him in the garden?" Then Peter started to curse and swear, "I don't even know this man you are talking about." Immediately a rooster crowed a second time. Then the Lord turned and looked at him. So Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he went outside, broke down, and wept bitterly. I do kind of want to stop real quick right here. I really wish we could get into all this with Peter because it's so interesting and there's a lot of fun, different things we can discuss there. But I really just want to discuss this kind of quick note because something I realized a couple years ago that has dramatically kind of changed the way I viewed this story, especially with Peter. If you look at what Scripture says here, it's very clear that it says that the Lord, referring to Jesus, looked at Peter. So Peter made eye contact with the one he declared as the Son of God and denied him out of fear. This is the same Peter that looked at Jesus literally the night before and was like, "Oh, I would follow you even till death." This is the Peter that when Jesus is asking, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter was the first one to be like, "Well, you are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God." But out of fear in this moment, he does fall away like Jesus predicted. Clearly, Jesus predicted. We all knew it was coming. But to know that the last time he denied him, they made eye contact. The weight that must have been on Peter. Because, kind of spoiling up ahead, this is the last time Peter will see Jesus before he dies. Again, Peter does not go to the cross with Jesus. So this is the last interaction that we see from these two. And the last thing Peter remembers is looking at Jesus and denying him 3 times. The weight that has to bring. And we'll dive more into this, not really today, but we will dig a little deeper later. But again, that's got to be hard. But again, we'll get to this later, much later. But let's keep going. When daylight came, the elders of the people, both the chief priest and the scribes, convened and brought him out before their Sanhedrin. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." But he said to them, "If I do tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." They all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" And he said to them, "You say that I am. Why do we need any more testimony then?" They said, "Since we have heard it from his mouth." Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that Jesus had been condemned, was full of remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood," he said. What's that to us?" they said. "See to it yourself." So he threw the silver into the temple and departed. Then he went and hung himself. The chief priests took the silver and said, "It's not permitted to put it into the temple treasury, since it is blood money." They conferred together and bought the Potiphar's field with it as a burial place for foreigners. Therefore, that field has been called Field of Blood to this day. Then what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him whose price was set before the Israelites, and they gave him to the Potiphar's field as the Lord directed. Then the whole assembly rose, tied Jesus up, and led him from Caiaphas to Pilate the governor. At the governor's headquarters it was early morning. They did not enter the headquarters themselves, otherwise they would have been defiled and unable to eat Passover. So Pilate came out to them and said, "What charge do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you." Pilate told them, "You take him and judge him according to your law. It's not illegal for us to put anyone to death, it's not legal for us to put anyone to death," the Jews declared. They said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, indicating what kind of death he was going to die. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation, opposing payment of taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king." While he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, Jesus didn't answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Aren't you going to answer? Don't you hear how much they are testifying against you? Look how many things they are accusing you of." But he didn't answer them even one charge, so that the governor was quite amazed. Then Pilate went back to the headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to them, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you asking this on your own, or have others told you about me?" "I am not a Jew, am I?" Pilate answered. "Your own nation and chief priest handed you over to me. What have you done?" "My kingdom is not of this world," Jesus said. "If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." "You are a king then?" Pilate asked. "You say that I am a king," Jesus said. "I was born for this, and I have come into the world for this. I testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." "What is truth?" Pilate said. We don't get an answer to that, by the way, which is kind of frustrating. It's kind of like you want to know, did Jesus give him an answer? Did Jesus tell him something? But we just kind of move on. It's mildly bothersome, but at the same time, it is interesting to look at what Jesus says during these trials, and kind of, again, one of those things. I wish we had more time to really just kind of dig that apart. But again, I'm trying. We want to focus more on the crucifixion today than the trials. That's kind of a story for another day. After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no grounds for charging him." But they kept insisting, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where he started even to here." When Pilate heard this, he asked if the man was a Galilean. Finding that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem during those days. Herod was very glad to see Jesus. For a long time he had wanted to see him because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some of the miracles performed by him. So he kept asking him questions, but Jesus did not answer him. The chief priests and scribes stood by, accusing him. Then Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt, mocking him, dressed him in bright clothing, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Previously, they had been enemies. What's fun here, just a quick side note for those who don't know, Herod Antipas was the one who was actually responsible for John the Baptist's death. So Jesus is literally standing before the guy who killed his cousin, and I feel like Herod would have also known that, so it's kind of an interesting dynamic there that definitely an interesting story to kind of know one day. I mean, we don't get a lot in scripture about that, but who knows, there might have been a little bit more there. I don't know. It'd be kind of one of those fun questions when you get to heaven and be like, hey, what all happened in that room? Because, I mean, it had to have been an interesting dynamic, to say the least. But, I don't know. These are things I think about, so let's keep going. Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You have brought this man as one who misleads the people. But in fact, after examining him in your presence, I have found no grounds to charge this man with those things you are accusing him of. Neither has Herod, because he sent him back to us. Clearly he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will have him whipped and then released." So I love that, because I find it hilarious that all these people apparently don't really like him and want something done, like the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, Herod Antipas. They send him to Pilate. Pilate doesn't really seem to have an issue with him, but all the others really have this issue, and they're like, oh, we need to get rid of him. We need to get rid of him. We need to do something about it. But nobody's willing to pull the trigger. And so they're all wanting everybody else to do it, because it's like the Jews, I feel like the Sanhedrin knows good and well that the Jews would rise up against them if they were to do this, because again, he was popular among the people. And so it's like, if they had outright done it, it would have caused an uprising from the Jews, mainly against them, which would have also put them in Rome's path, because of the fact that Rome doesn't care what they do as long as there's not an uprising. And so it's just funny that they're all passing him around and nobody wants to be the one to do it. So Herod's finally like, you know what? Or not Herod, Pilate, my apologies. Pilate finally just sits here and is like, I don't see a problem with him, but you know what? Y'all have a problem. I'll have him whipped and basically returned to you. Like that'll be his punishment. Because again, it's like no one wants that backlash. Like they're all just a bunch of cowards. And so Pilate finally just like, okay, fine. I'll deal with this briefly and we'll move on with our day. At the festival, the governor's custom was to release to the crowd a prisoner they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas, who was in prison with rebels who had committed murder during the rebellion. The crowds came up and began to ask Pilate to do for them as was his custom. Pilate answered them, "Who is it that you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, the King of the Jews?" For he knew it was because of envy that the chief priest handed him over. Well, let's just keep reading and I'll get into some of this in a minute. While he was sitting on the judge's bench, his wife sent to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for today I suffered terribly in a dream because of him." The chief priests and the elders, however, persuaded and stirred up the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to execute Jesus. The governor asked them, "Which of these two do you want me to release to you?" Then they all cried out together, "Take this man away, release Barabbas to us." Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate addressed them again. "What should I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ?" But they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why? What has this man done wrong? I have found no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him whipped and then release him." But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him!" Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The governor's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's residence and gathered the whole company around him. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns, put it on his head, then stripped him, clothed him in a purple robe, and placed a staff in his right hand. They mocked him by getting on their knees and paying him homage. They kept coming up to him and saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They they were hitting him on the head with a stick, spitting on him and slapping his face. Pilate went outside again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know I found no grounds to charge him with." Then Jesus came out wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the temple servants saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate responded, "Take him and crucify him yourselves, since I have found no grounds for charging him." We have a law, the Jews replied to him, and according to that law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this statement, he was more afraid than ever. He went back to the headquarters and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus did not give him an answer. So Pilate said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" "You would have no authority over me at all," Jesus answered him, "if it hadn't been given to you from above. This is why the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." From that moment, Pilate kept trying to release him, but the Jews shouted, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Anyone who makes himself a king oppresses Caesar." They kept up the pressure, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside. He sat down on the judge's seat in a place called the Stone Pavement. It was the preparation day for the Passover, and it was about noon. Then he told the Jews, "Here is your king." They shouted, take him away, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Should I crucify your king? We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered, and their voices won out. Quick side note, I love how they say we have no king but Caesar, as if they're not supposed to be the chief priests, so God should be their only king. Literally, you can go back to Old Testament and see that this has always been kind of an issue with them, where they always just kind of cater to whoever's in charge. When you dig through the Book of Kings, you see this a lot. But, it's like literally the Israelites called out for God to give them a king, so they gave him Saul, and Saul followed God for a while, but then Saul started following himself, and they just kept following him. Like, okay, well, our king said so. It's like, as bad as it sounds, we have to, it's one of these things as humans, we have to have a quote-unquote king/God, so to say. It's just what we choose to do that with, and so it's funny here that they're the chief priests who their only king should be God, such as like with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who wouldn't bow down to Nebuchadnezzar because they're like, oh, we only have one God, and that's the only person we bow down to. And yet here they are, they're like, oh, well, we don't have a king except for Caesar. It's like, okay, just forget y'all serve God, but, okay. But clearly they didn't care at this moment. They were trying to get their point across and get what they wanted done. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that a riot was starting instead, he took some water, washed his hands in the front of the crowd, and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." All the people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." So Pilate decided to grant this demand and release Barabbas. Then he handed Jesus over to be crucified. So Pilate tries his best to set Jesus free, literally asking a couple of different times, like, hey, I don't find a reason to put him to death, I mean, he literally calls him an innocent man. He even tried to just flog him and beat him and be like, hey, look, there you go, I beat him, is that good enough for you guys? And like, it still wasn't good enough for them, and with that being said, like, this wasn't just a simple beating, like, it was a flogging. And so, Jesus was tied to a post, and they would, violently, viciously lash him with a whip. And, like, the whips they would use often had, like, shards of metal or broken clay pieces or things like that, just to add insult to injury. And so this wasn't just like a simple like whip and it snaps, and these are whips that would implant themselves. Like they would grab hold of your skin and just rip, your back to shreds. You know, um, to the point of like it would expose like bones and tendons sometimes. Like that's how deep this would hit. And so, that like Pilate's like that's got to satisfy you, right? I mean, this man was literally beaten within an inch of his life. Is that not good enough? And for the people, it wasn't. They still wanted more. Um, so then you go into letting the people choose. He's like, fine, I'll give you a choice between Jesus or Barabbas. And he's like, it's simple, right? Jesus is just some preacher, like, okay, whatever. He says stuff you don't like, but like, he's just a preacher. Whereas this guy over here is part of a rebellion, and yet the people still chose Barabbas over Jesus. You know, um, what seemed like a no-brainer to put up innocent Jesus against a murderous Barabbas, you know, Pilate surely thought the crowd would be like, "Oh yeah, kill Barabbas," right? And sadly, he was wrong. You know, um, the angry crowd chose to kill Jesus instead. I mean, even Pilate kind of was shocked by that, and he even wipes his hands clean of it. Literally, he wipes his hands clean of what is taking place, and the fact that he's like, fine, you guys called it, you wanted it, you want to crucify him, that's on you. Like technically, he's, I guess, signing the order, so to say, but he's literally washing his hands clean. I mean, they all wanted Jesus gone, you know, um, but not a single one of them had the audacity to do it. Not even Pilate, who literally washed his hands clean. Like, okay, whatever, you guys want it, but you aren't willing to do it. Um, Again, he even tried to get them to change their mind, and they still just stuck to it. Sadly, mob mentality ruled out here. Um, so let's keep going. After they had mocked Jesus, they stripped him of the purple robe, put his own clothes on him, and led him away, carrying the cross by himself to crucify him. As they were going out, they forced a man coming into the country who was passing by to carry Jesus' cross. He was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. They laid the cross on him to carry behind Jesus. A large crowd of people followed him, including women who were mourning and lamenting. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and your children. Look, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the women without children, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" They brought Jesus to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, and he did not take it. So, like we mentioned on Palm Sunday, Jesus was welcomed into the city as a mighty king returning home after a victory, with the crowds praising him. But he left the city whipped, bleeding, and carrying a heavy cross to the outside of the city to be hung on. That's a span of about 6 days that it took to change things. 6 very eventful days at that, but I mean, again, everyone shouting for deliverance from him on Sunday to mocking him by Friday. A royal king on Sunday and a criminal on Friday. And I mean, it's just crazy to think about. And I mean, when you dig into the fact that like he had to carry his own cross, like how evil is that? To make someone carry. I mean, this heavy torture device, like something that you're about to crucify them on, like you're about to hang them up on this, and you're making them carry it about a mile outside the city. Like, and what's bad is we haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. Like, it's only gonna get darker from here, Like, so, listeners beware. I mean, you're forewarned. Um, so let's just keep going. There they crucified him and two others, criminals, with him, one on either side, with Jesus in the middle. Now it was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing." Pilate also had a sign made and put on the cross above his head. It said, "This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. So the chief priest of the Jews said to Pilate, "Don't write the King of the Jews, but that he said, 'I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate replied, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided it into 4 parts, a part for each soldier. They also took the tunic, which was seamless, woven into one piece from the top. So they said to one another, "Let's not tear it, but cast lots for it, to see who gets it." This happened so that the scripture might be fulfilled that says, "They divided my clothes among themselves, and they cast lots for my clothing." This is what the soldiers did when they sat down and were guarding him there. Those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads, and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross, save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him and said, "He saved others, but cannot even save himself. He is the King of Israel? Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God, let God rescue him now, if he takes pleasure in him." For he said, "I am the Son of God." The soldiers also mocked him. They came offering him sour wine and said, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." In the same way, even the criminals who were crucified with him taunted him. One of the criminals hanging there began to yell insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other answered, rebuking him, "Don't you even fear God, since you are undergoing the same punishment? We are punished justly because we're getting back what we deserve for the things we did. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon. Standing on the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then said to his disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his home. So for those who don't know, the disciple mentioned here is John. This is John's account. He always referred to himself as like the disciple whom Jesus loved and things like that. A fun thing, love to get into one day, not today. But John was the only one to stick with him to the cross. Of all the others fell away, and John was the only one. I told you I'd give you an answer to that in case y'all didn't know. John was the only disciple who followed him from the garden all the way to the cross. Maybe that's why he was rewarded with being the only disciple not to be martyred and write Revelation. Who knows? Maybe. Just speculation. Just a fun fact to throw out there. I don't know. What I do know is at this moment the perfect Lamb of God was crucified. And I don't think we always fully process what that means, you know. And that's kind of where a lot of this brutality comes in today. So it's kind of your, I guess, graphic warning, so to say, because I really want to take a deeper dive into what that means and to look at all of that, like, crucifixion really involves with. So to begin with, Jesus' body was already mangled by the flogging from earlier. This would have exposed muscles and possibly even bones, like I said earlier. I mean, again, those shards of metal and clay parts. I mean, they're hooking into your flesh and just ripping whatever it can get its hands on. And then as the blood poured out of his body, he had to carry this cross outside the city while probably already experiencing shock and exhaustion, which is more than likely what ended up causing him to collapse, which is why Simon had to carry it the rest of the way. And that's just the start. When they arrived at Golgotha, the real nightmare kind of really begins. They would have pierced his wrist and feet. I know we always talk about hands. It's all a language thing, but typically it probably would have been wrist where it supports on the bone right there. The hands, it kind of would have more than likely basically ripped through because the muscles and tendons and bones and stuff aren't exactly the strongest there. So more than likely it was the wrist. Because they would have, the nails would have been right there on that median nerve right there, which would have caused severe, like, electric shocks basically throughout his body. And I mean, these weren't just simple nails. Like, these were 5 to 7 inch long nails and about a centimeter thick. I mean, they were designed to hold a human body basically onto a cross. So they were made sturdy. But those nails being, especially on your hand, your wrist, but even on your feet, this would have been used as your main support. Because see, with the arms stretched out like that, it puts a strain on the torso, which would cause difficulty with breathing. So basically you're literally just stuck in this constant cycle where you would kind of like push/pull up on the nails with your feet and wrist to literally gasp for air. Because once you relax, once you let go of that, you would start suffocating again. And so you would just be in this constant loop for as long as you could physically do it, which, mind you, again, Jesus had already been flogged. And so body already as weak as can be, and then you're thrown up on a cross like that, trying to pull yourself up just to gasp for air. And so, over time, you would get to a point where your organs would obviously start shutting down from both a little bit of dehydration kind of starts setting in, which is part of where that comes from. Part of it from obviously struggling to breathe and a lack of oxygen. And then typically you would end up dying from suffocation on a cross is one of the main ways you would end up dying. But the medical experts who have kind of looked at what the Gospels list actually kind of say that Jesus probably died of a combination of shock, exhaustion, asphyxiation, acidosis, and heart failure. That's what death on the cross meant. It was one of the most brutal and torturous ways ever created to kill someone, you know, and it was created by Rome, who were kind of the masters of death, you know. I mean, known for the Colosseum, both for sport and for entertainment. Obviously, you spend hours talking about what went on there. So, I mean, you know, when they set their minds to finding ways to kill people, they knew what they were doing. And the cross is kind of one of those crowning achievements, so to say. You know, I mean, this lasted for hours that Jesus hung there. I mean, that's how he suffered, you know. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to keep it together here. Sorry, but just kind of even putting this together, again, I want us to really process what took place that day, because it was done for us. You know, I mean, this is how Jesus suffered on the cross. But what's even crazier is even in the suffocation, he spoke 7 phrases, and we're not going to get into all of them, but I do want to keep reading to show you just a few. From noon until 3 in the morning, darkness came over the whole land because the sun's light failed. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out with a loud voice. I'm not even going to try to butcher that right now, guys. I've practiced it like 10 times. I always butcher it, so I'm just going to... But the translation says, my God, why have you abandoned me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "See, he's calling for Elijah." After this, when Jesus knew that everything was now finished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was sitting there, so they fixed a sponge full of sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it up to his mouth and said, "Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down." When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." And Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit." Bowing his head, he gave up his spirit and breathed his last. So again, Jesus gives 7 distinct statements while on the cross. Knowing that he's having to say this while basically suffocating, just honestly, to me, even heightens the, I guess, importance. I don't know if that's the best word there, but the importance of what's being said. You know, while suffocating, Jesus says, "I need to say these things." Again, I wish I could do a deep dive into all these, and again, that might be something we do one day, but we do still have a decent bit to cover, so I just kind of recommend looking into these for yourself, because there's some really interesting things there. So, but I will say, like, with these, we do see themes that have kind of defined all of Jesus's ministries as, like, or his ministry as his last words. Because in his last words, he speaks on things from forgiveness to salvation to love to suffering to victory to trusting God, you know. Talk about famous last words, you know. But I do want to touch on 2 phrases real quick. One of them's the one that I cannot pronounce well, so that's why I didn't even try. But it's my God, why have you forsaken me?" And for those who don't know, Jesus was quoting a psalm here. In fact, it's Psalm 22 to be exact. And what you see really is, like, the Jews of the day would have recognized what he was quoting when he said it. And that's kind of why they phrase it the way they do. And so I recommend taking a minute this weekend if you have a moment and actually read over Psalm 22. There's only 31 verses, but I kind of want to just highlight a few of them, especially with what today is. So starting in verse 1, where it literally quotes, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Again, quoting back to what Jesus said on the cross, getting people to realize, like, hey, like basically it was the trigger to say, he says this, and while it does apply to what's going on, it's also kind of a cue to them to say, hey, remember this psalm from David? Go check it out, so to say. Um, so anyways, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far from my deliverance and from my words of groaning? My God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. By night, yet I have no rest. Now, I do want to kind of skip down a little bit to verse 11. I don't normally like skipping things, but the way this is structured, for the sake of what we're discussing today, I want to kind of just mainly focus on some of the other aspects. Again, please go read it. I'm not trying to skip it to make a point or to kind of twist anything, because I'm not about that lifestyle, but there's a reason I'm skipping these for now. So let's get down to verse 11. Don't be far from me, because distress is near, and there's no one to help. Many bulls surround me, strong ones of Bashan encircle me. They open their mouths against me, lions mauling and roaring. I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are disjointed. My heart is like wax, melting within me. My strength is dried up like baked clay. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You put me into the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me. A gang of evildoers has closed in on me. They pierce my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. People look and stare at me. They divided my garments among themselves, and they cast lots for my clothing. But you, Lord, don't be far away. My strength come quickly to help me. Rescue my life from the sword, my only life from the power of these dogs. Save me from the lion's mouth, from the horns of wild oxen. You answered me. So, again, I skipped a decent bit, and I kind of have for a reason. I mainly just kind of wanted to hone in on those select verses, because that's the exact image we see of Christ on the cross. And this was written hundreds and hundreds of years before this, and so it almost feels like, I don't know, like in a weird way, it feels like God kind of like gave this to David to write down. So like when Jesus is on the cross, like I'll tell everybody exactly what's going on. Like obviously being on the cross, I can't go into these long, a psalm like this. So it's like I'll give it to David, and then when the time is right, my people will know, because I can, basically I can share that. And so that's kind of why I just kind of wanted to point out, kind of paint more of that image of what it was like, in a sense, from Jesus's perspective, so to say, of what took place there. So, and then right after this comes the final words from the cross. And those, it's a word, a phrase, so to say, that now has become one of the most beautiful phrases in all of Christianity, and that is, "It is finished." The work is finished. What Jesus came to this earth to accomplish is done. He is putting sin to death once and for all. And that's good news for us. But once again, like I have so famously done this entire week, I am getting ahead of myself. So let's kind of keep reading. Suddenly, the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth quaked, and the rocks were split. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him, who were keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and the things that happened, they were terrified and said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." All the crowds that had gathered for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, went home, striking their chests. But all who knew him, including many women who had followed Jesus from Galilee and looked after him, were there, watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and Salome the mother of Zebedee's sons. So, this moment's absolutely insane when you really dig down to it. I mean, dead saints rose from their tombs to begin with, you know? Kind of crazy. Not going to really get much into that, mainly because I'm not going to act like I'm an expert on all that. I mean, saints came out of the tombs apparently and appeared to people in the city after the resurrection. It's crazy. It's crazy. So, I believe that's only found in Matthew, I think, or maybe Luke. I think it's Matthew, though. But anyways, the one part I do really want to hone in on is the earthquake, though. Because the earthquake, to me, is the really cool part. I mean, the whole earth literally quaked at the greatest display of love. And that's so cool to me. But what's really neat here is what it talks about with the veil being torn in two. You know, like this was not some accident. This was a very intentional. It wasn't like, oh, the earth shook and it just happened to rip. Like, no, this was very intentional by God. Because see, for those who don't know how the temple was set up, you had like the place for everybody, and then you had this place known as the Holy of Holies, which where God's presence was. And so there was this veil put in that place because only the high priest could go behind there, special occasions from time to time. Not going to get into that. But so what you see, though, is this veil is a really big deal because it separates, so to say, the common folks from the high priest who is allowed to go in there. And so with this veil separating people from God, so to say, you know, it made it a big deal when it sits here and tears apart. You know, it's a physical, kind of like I told you guys earlier this week about there's often physical representations of a spiritual concept, and this is just another one of those. Is that spiritual, or like physically there was this veil that separated the people from God, whereas spiritually our sin separated us from God. So our sin is this veil right here. And by Jesus dying on the cross, when this earthquake happens, the veil gets torn apart. And it shows that we all have access to God now. Through Jesus' death, again, this veil is our sin. And so it separated us from God. And so through his death, when it tears, it's giving us access to God now, because no longer is there the separation because of our sin. You know, because Jesus, being our high priest, as we hear about in Hebrews, he entered, so to say, the place to be able to tear the veil to give us this new life. You know, see, he lived the life that we couldn't, to die the death that we should have died, to bring us back to God. Because again, when you go back, the Garden of Eden, right? So God creates perfect paradise. Man breaks that, as far as they sinned, they brought sin into the world. And so Jesus went to the cross to put sin to death on the cross so that he can tear the barrier, which was the sin that was separating us from God. He tore that barrier between God and man. You know, Jesus' sacrifice made sure that nothing could separate us from God again. You know, see, Jesus bled and died to be with us. Because when we fell in the garden, right? When man fell in the garden and sinned and put that barrier, God said that's not good enough. So from that moment, it's always been the design, but that's a whole other theological concept we're not getting into today. But from then, God said, I'm getting my people back. So Jesus came to die to be with us. I mean, it's crazy to think that he would do something like that for someone like us. I mean, like, let's be real. We're pretty awful. We can act and sit here and act like we're saints and we're all high and mighty and, oh, we're good people. We do nice things. But, like, let's be real. We're all pretty terrible people when we boil down to things, you know. And so, you know, it's crazy to think that he would do something like that for someone like us. But love is the reason he did, you know. Again, we ruined it, but he said, that's not good enough. I love my people too much to be separated. I'm going to provide a way, you know. And the reason for that was fully love, you know. I mean, pure love was poured out from his scars on that day. Because, see, love comes with a price. You know, love is sacrifice. And, you know, he willingly paid that price with his life. So why shouldn't we give him ours at the end of the day, right? I mean, he gave his so that we could live. So why shouldn't we live it for him, right? Right? Getting a little ahead of myself. You know, because, see, at the end of the day, again, sin separated us. Our sin was black as could be. It was a stain on our life, you know. But his blood ran red to make our sin as white as snow. You know, I mean, his blood literally stained the frame of the cross to wash our sins away. You know, to give us new life. Because, see, the cross, at the end of the day, taught us what love really means. Just sit on that for a second, though. I mean, I really want you to just sit for a second and process what that means. Let's finish this up. Since it was the preparation day, the Jews did not want the bodies to remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a special day. They requested that Pilate have the men's legs broken and that their bodies be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and of the other one who was crucified with him. When they came to Jesus, they did not break his legs, since they saw that he was already dead. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this had testified so that you also may believe. For those things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones were broken. Also another scripture saying, they will look at the one they pierced. When it was already evening, because it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the Sanhedrin, a good and righteous man who had not agreed with the plan and action, and who himself was looking forward to the kingdom of God, came and boldly went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. That's a really bold thing. Again, it says he was a part of the Sanhedrin, but Joseph of Arimathea still said, I'm going to do this. Like, he was a part of the group that literally just handed Jesus over to be crucified, and he's going out against it to say, I'm going to bury him properly. So, bold statement, but does fulfill prophecy. So, you know, good for him, I guess. Pilate was surprised that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he had already died. When he found out from the centurion, Pilate gave him permission. He gave the corpse to Joseph, who came and took the body away. Nicodemus, who had previously come to him at night, also came, bringing a mixture of about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. So even Nicodemus, for those of you, I've always kind of been curious about this before. So Jesus and Nicodemus have this conversation in John 3, And I was always like, man, I wonder whatever came about that conversation. Apparently it came out well, considering Nicodemus is here helping bury Jesus. So, fun fact of the day, if anybody's ever wondered that. Probably not. I'm weird like that, but here we are. They took Jesus' body and wrapped it in a clean, fine linen cloth with the fragrant spices, according to the burial customs of the Jews. There was a garden in the place where he was crucified. In it was a tomb Joseph had newly cut into the rock, where no one had ever been placed. They placed Jesus there because of the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby. He left after rolling the great stone against the entrance of the tomb. It was the preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. The woman who had come with him from Galilee followed. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. They were seated there, facing the tomb, and observed where and how his body was placed. Then they returned and prepared spices and perfumes, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. The next day, which followed the preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that while the deceiver was still alive, he said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' So give orders that the tomb be secure until that day, or till the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come, steal him, and tell people he had risen from the dead. And the last deception will be worse than the first." "Take guards," Pilate told them. "Go and make it as secure as you know how." They went and secured the tomb by setting a seal on the stone and placing guards. So, make no mistake, Jesus died on that cross. I know that's one common popular theory sometimes with people trying to disprove things, that, oh, he didn't actually die. But kind of like I said earlier, Rome was the masters of death. You know, if they wanted you dead, you were going to be dead. So, Jesus was dead. Even the spear in his side proved this. The mix of blood and water is likely a result of fluid built up around his heart and lungs. Again, heart failure could have been one of the leading causes of death for Jesus. So Jesus died, and they buried him that night due to the coming Sabbath, which brings to end probably the craziest 24 hours in history. Again, the day started very early in the morning with trial after trial after trial, to Jesus getting whipped, to the crowds turning on him. Then he carried a cross through the streets that welcomed him as a king, to now they're mocking and scoffing, as he carries the cross. Only to be put on that cross to suffer for hours and hours as they scoff. And finally to death and burial, an eventful day, to say the least. So I promise I'm closing up, guys. But I do want to read some verses from Isaiah that, kind of like the ones in Psalm, they really describe what took place that fateful day. So I'll be reading from Isaiah 52, starting in verse 13. "See, my servant will be successful. He will be raised and lifted up and greatly exalted. Just as many were appalled at you, his appearance was so disfigured that he did not look like a man, and his form did not resemble a human being. So he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths because of him, for they will see what had not been told them, and they will understand what they had not heard." So again, not usually in the business of skipping around a little bit, but for the context of today, I do kind of want to skip a little ahead to chapter 53, starting in verse 3. "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of suffering who knew what sickness was. He was like someone people turned away from. He was despised, and we didn't value him. Yet he himself bore our sickness, and he carried our pains. But we in turn regarded him stricken, struck down by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced because of our rebellion, crushed because of our iniquities. Punishment for our peace was on him, and we were healed by his wounds. We all went astray like sheep, we all have turned to our own way. The Lord had punished him for the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, and like a sheep silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. Jesus willingly took the cross for us. The Son of Man reduced himself to a common criminal, beaten, mocked, despised, and torn apart for us. See, he did all of this for us. He chose to step out of heaven, where he was worshipped non-stop by the angels and the multitude singing praises to him, to come to this world, to be betrayed by a friend, and die a brutal death to provide us a way back home. See, we were created to be with God all the way back to the Garden of Eden. God created a paradise for he and man to be in harmony with each other. Adam and Eve failed at that, and they brought sin into this world. But God said that wasn't good enough. So Jesus came to bring us back home. But in order to do so, he was trampled on, torn to shreds, and died a criminal's death. As Jesus hung on the cross, he faced physical, mental, emotional, and even spiritual distress. I mean, Satan probably thought he had won at that moment, you know? Hell probably cheered, feeling that they had won when Jesus had died. The earth literally went dark at the time of his death. So after all that, maybe we should start reconsidering the name, you know? I mean, what's so good about Good Friday?